ensured that no one would ever again mistake convenience for consequence when it came to the sacred gift flowing silently beneath their feet. By the third, I knew I was in trouble. I wasn't just getting a neighbor, I was getting an entire neighborhood, and the kind of people who lived in those places rarely liked having a ranch next door, especially one with the occasional rooster crowing at 5 a.m. or cow manure perfume wafting over their chemically fertilized lawns. I tried to stay optimistic. Maybe they'd be decent folks. Maybe they'd mind their business. But no. The moment the homeowners association formed, the war began. At first, it was subtle. Notes pinned to my mailbox, nicely worded but patronizing, as if I hadn't already lived there 10 years longer than they'd even heard of the county. Dear neighbor, while we respect your right to maintain agricultural activities, we ask you to consider the impact of your barn's aesthetic on the surrounding community. The nerve. Then came the noise complaints, even though my tractor hadn't changed a thing about its hum in over a decade. Next, they started showing up near my fence line. Cell phones out, snapping photos of my goats like they were endangered species. One guy, some fella with 2 white teeth and 2 pink golf shirts, had the gall to accuse me of violating zoning ordinances because my barn didn't blend with the modern development plan. I laughed in his face and pointed him to the county clerk's office, where my grandfather's land records had been filed since the Roosevelt administration. But things didn't stop there. No, that was just the HOA getting warmed up. I'd occasionally catch a group of them huddled by the edge of their property. Clipboard, measuring tape, whispering like kids plotting a heist. Then came the emails. Hundreds of them. Most saying the same thing in slightly more condescending tones. They didn't like the barn. They didn't like the noise. They didn't like the smell. They didn't like me. But the final straw came on a Tuesday. I'd been out in town picking up feed and a few parts for the old Ford tractor. Came home late afternoon, sun dipping behind the hills, casting long shadows across the back acres. As I pulled up the drive, I spotted something off. Something tall. Something metal. Something wrong. A brand new black iron fence had been installed along the rear edge of my property. 10 feet high, spiked at the top, clean and professionally installed. And here's the kicker. It ran right through my land, cutting off access to the eastern pasture where I kept the horses. I parked the truck and marched down the property line, boots crunching on dry grass, and my blood boiling with every step. It wasn't just a fence, it was a damn fortress wall. Not only did they install it without notice, but they also placed it 10 feet inside my deeded land. I checked my markers, checked my map, checked everything twice. My land. No question. I paced the length of it 3 times before storming into the house and calling the number listed on the last HOA newsletter they'd stuffed in my mailbox like a threat. No answer. So I emailed. No reply. So I did what any sensible man would do. I marched my way to their next monthly board meeting, held in the community clubhouse that looked like a sad attempt at a Tuscan villa but smelled like cheap wine and chlorine from the adjacent pool. They didn't like me showing up. I didn't care. I stood there in front of that long table, surrounded by people wearing matching polos and sipping from water bottles labeled with their HOA logo, and I laid out my case. You built a fence across my land, I said. You didn't ask. You didn't notify. You sure as hell didn't get permission. I want it down by Friday. The president, a tall, rail-thin woman with a voice like a passive-aggressive parrot, looked at me over her glasses and said, "It's for the community's aesthetic and safety." I blinked. Aesthetic and safety? I repeated. She nodded. We've received multiple complaints from residents about the unsightly view of livestock and agricultural equipment. We voted to extend the community barrier to shield our homes. She smiled like she just handed me a casserole. That land, I said very slowly, is mine. She shrugged. We can revisit boundary lines in the next planning cycle, but for now we're confident this solution serves the greater good. The greater good, I'll never forget those words. That was the moment the line was crossed. That was the moment I stopped being neighborly. If fences were their thing, I thought, then so be it. Fences they get. More than they ever dreamed of. The kind of fences that didn't just separate land but made statements. Political statements. Petty statements. Personal statements. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the porch with a notebook sketching plans in the glow of a lantern while my dog snored by my boots. I called my lawyer first thing in the morning. Called the county second. Pulled up the land survey, the deed, the maps. I read every line of the HOA charter I could get my hands on. And once I knew my rights, once I knew every inch of my property and the full legal might I had at my disposal, that's when the real fun began. The irony when it hit them must have been like a freight train made of spite. But for me, it began calmly with paperwork and patience, not pitchforks and torches. See, I'd spent a lifetime being underestimated by men in suits and women with laminated clipboards. They thought I was just some dusty rancher who talked slow and walked slower, but while they were busy measuring lawn heights and fining residents for flowerbed violations, I was learning how to build a wall, one that would make emperors jealous. And I started with the permits. I wasn't reckless. This was chess, not checkers. I met with county clerks, zoning officials, and 2 lawyers, one of whom wore snakeskin boots and had a look in his eye like he'd enjoy a good duel in court just as much as I would. We pulled the original land surveys. Turns out, my property wrapped around the entire subdivision like a horseshoe, east, south, and west. The north side was blocked by a floodplain that belonged to the county and couldn't be developed or crossed. That meant their entire neighborhood had one way in, one road, one legal public entrance. The rest, surrounded by me. I double-checked the boundaries, walked the perimeter with a map and a metal detector to find the survey pins, and once I was satisfied, I submitted plans for agricultural fencing. Technically, barbed wire counted legal in the county if properly marked. And as for the front, that's where things got creative. I submitted separate paperwork for a private security gate to restrict access to my ranch road from through traffic. That gate just happened to be located at the only public entrance to their subdivision. Totally within my rights. Totally legal. Totally brilliant. Once the paperwork was filed and permits approved, I didn't wait. I'd already lined up the contractors, an outfit of ex-oil field welders and rig workers who could put up 100 yards of fencing in a night if you kept them fed and full of Red Bull. They rolled in on a Saturday evening just as the sun began to set. I had food trucks out there, lighting rigs, diesel generators humming, and a supply trailer full of materials. Steel poles, welded mesh, high-tensile wire, and enough post-hole diggers to make a prison warden jealous. We worked all night, laughing, joking, drilling into the earth and raising fences under the cover of floodlights and country music. By dawn Sunday morning, the transformation was complete. Their picture-perfect little neighborhood now stood encased in a fortress of galvanized steel and rust-resistant spite. A barbed wire crown lined the top. The gate, painted matte black, stood 15 feet tall, with an electronic keypad in the middle. I even had a private property, no trespassing sign laser-etched in bold letters. And the key code? I hadn't shared it with a soul. Now, if you've never seen an HOA president have a meltdown in real time, let me paint the picture for you. It was about 7:05 a.m. when she showed up. Still in her robe, hair a frizzed-out mess, gripping a steaming mug of something too weak to be coffee. She stormed down the cul-de-sac, barefoot, marching up to the gate like she could make it open with sheer indignation. She hit the keypad. Nothing. She pounded on the metal. Still nothing. She screamed. I was already up, of course, sitting on the tailgate of my truck with a cold glass of sweet tea and my dog Hank lounging beside me. I watched her lose composure like a cake in the sun, and when she finally spotted me on the ridge, I gave her a little wave and a smile. "Open this gate," she screeched. "Morning, Brenda," I called down. "Beautiful day, ain't it? This is illegal. You can't do this. You're restricting public access to our homes." "Actually," I said, taking a sip, "I'm restricting access to my road. You're welcome to call the county. They'll confirm it's mine, not yours." Sure enough, by noon, the sheriff was out there, called in by Brenda and half the HOA board. The deputy was a guy named Kyle, young and polite, who'd been out to my place before when a cow wandered onto the road. He looked uncomfortable as hell. "Hey, Mr. Dawson," he said, tipping his hat. "Mind if I take a look?" "Not at all, Kyle. Everything's marked and mapped. You're standing on my land." Brenda was fuming behind him, red in the face and gesturing like a malfunctioning traffic signal. "This is outrageous. It's entrapment." Kyle cleared his throat. "Ma'am, it's not entrapment if you can leave any time. Mr. Dawson's gate is on his property. He's within his rights. Then how are we supposed to get in and out? Cal shrugged. Might want to talk to him about that. I didn't make it easy. I didn't make it cheap. I installed a monthly toll system, $50 a vehicle, payable through a pre-registered code. If they wanted 24/7 access, that was $500 a year per household. I even offered a premium pass with faster gate opening and guest QR codes for $1,200 annually. If they didn't want to pay, they could always walk a half-mile to the public bus stop beyond the floodplain. Most of them didn't even know it existed. The media got involved about a week later. One of the HOA members had a sister at the local news station. They ran a puff piece titled "Man Fences Neighborhood, Claims Rightful Land." Made me look like a nut job at first until the follow-up story came out, this time with a legal expert and drone footage showing just how clearly the subdivision was boxed in. Public opinion shifted. I was no longer a crazy hermit. I was the lone rancher who fought back. Still, the HOA didn't back down. Brenda tried filing for an emergency injunction to force me to remove the gate. The judge laughed her out of the courtroom after reviewing the property maps and hearing how they'd installed their own fence through my land just weeks prior. The footage of that hearing went viral, especially the part where the judge leaned forward and said, "Seems to me, ma'am, you fenced him in first. He just returned the favor." But petty doesn't sleep. The HOA tried everything. They tried building a side road through the floodplain. County denied it for environmental reasons. They tried to helicopter in supplies illegal without a permit. One guy even tried driving a lawn tractor through a drainage culvert to reach the highway. Got stuck. Needed to be winched out by fire rescue. I let them suffer just enough to understand how deeply I could dig in, but not enough to get anyone hurt. That wasn't my style. Then came the real genius. I set up a kiosk, right at the gate. It had an intercom, a card reader, a touchscreen menu, and a Wi-Fi hotspot. They could pay right there, get their code, even order expedited delivery if they wanted the gate to open within 10 minutes. I made it slick, professional, better tech than their clubhouse had. A local app developer helped me build a mobile version. Soon, folks who once screamed at me were paying quietly and waving sheepishly as they drove past. The money I made in that first month? Let's just say it covered my legal bills and paid for a new tractor. By the second month, half the HOA board resigned. Brenda, however, clung to power like a barnacle to a sinking ship. She tried sending a cease and desist, then a community unity proposal that offered to buy back the land at fair market value. I replied with a counteroffer. They could rent a 5-foot section of dirt by the mailbox for $100,000 a year. Negotiations stalled. Then, something unexpected happened. A few of the residents came by with beers. Quietly, after dark. One guy, Chad I think, said, "Look man, we didn't know the HOA was going to start a war. We just wanted to live somewhere peaceful." Another said, "I used to live in a condo with worse rules. This place has become a joke. But your move, kind of brilliant." That night I realized I wasn't just fighting for my land. I was proving a point. One about freedom, ownership, and the cost of pushing people too far. I didn't hate the people in that neighborhood. I just hated the way they tried to pretend the world should fit their blueprint. But the land out here doesn't bow to bylaws. It bows to the ones willing to fight for it. So I let the fences stand. I maintained them. I even added flower beds along the outside. When spring came, I planted sunflowers along the perimeter. A local artist offered to paint murals on the gate. Kids started calling it the Castle Gate. Tourists took selfies. The HOA? They faded into irrelevance. Their rules meant less and less when their members stopped showing up. Brenda eventually moved. Her house sitting unsold for 6 months before a retired cowboy bought it with cash and strung up a Texas flag on the porch. Me? I still sit on the porch every morning with Hank, sipping tea and listening to the quiet hum of fences well earned. People sometimes ask me if it was worth it, all the time, the money, the drama. And I always say, damn right it was. You don't build fences to keep people out. You build them to remind folks where the line is, and what happens when they try to cross it. They came at me with everything they had. Lawyers in shiny suits, frantic letters stamped with official HOA seals, emails that rang with the shrill digital voice of panic, and even a personal visit from one of the board members, all red-faced and sweating under the Texas sun, standing just beyond the locked gate of their now internalized neighborhood, trying to negotiate from the wrong side of a fence they never saw coming. But I wasn't moved. Not because I didn't feel the weight of what I'd done, but because I had done it all legally, cleanly, and with more precision than any of them had ever expected from a man they once labeled a backwards rancher. They underestimated me. That was their first mistake. Their second was thinking that bureaucracy and manipulation would always win over grit and determination. The moment they erected that fence cutting off my own land, my family's land, which had been in our name since before the idea of subdivisions even existed, I knew they were declaring a war they didn't have the stomach for. And so when I retaliated, I didn't just throw up a fence. I built a wall of lawful vengeance, stretching post to post, wrapping entirely around their fancy suburban cluster of uniform beige homes, their solar-powered street lamps, and their perfectly trimmed front lawns where not a single blade of grass dared grow too tall for fear of citation. Now they were the ones locked in, and I held the only key. The irony was too rich to ignore, and neither did the public. News of what I'd done spread like wildfire. A local reporter caught wind of it after overhearing two HOA residents arguing outside a locked community gate, while their confused Uber driver waited, engine idling. By the next day, my phone was blowing up with interview requests. At first, I declined them all. I wasn't in this for fame or clout. I just wanted to be left alone on my land. But then one of the networks ran a segment calling me the rancher who turned HOA tyrants into suburban hostages, and I couldn't help but laugh. That laughter turned into a full-belly roar when they showed drone footage of my fencing job, pristine, symmetrical, and unbroken, snaking like a no-nonsense border around their entire, gated community. Only now the gate was mine. When I finally accepted an interview request, I laid it all out on camera. I showed them the original land deeds, maps going back 100 years, and the precise legal permits I'd filed for the fencing. I explained how their developer had failed to secure legal easements for permanent public access through my property when building the main road that connected their HOA to the county highway. It was an oversight born from arrogance or possibly greed, assuming that I'd never care, never check, never fight. They were wrong, and now they were trapped behind their own negligence. The HOA board was losing it. They sent cease and desist letters, several, in fact, all filled with legal bluster and veiled threats. I handed them straight to my attorney, Claire Ferguson, who was smarter than all of them combined. Claire had a passion for land rights law and a burning dislike for HOAs, especially the kind that thought they could muscle their way through anything with a clipboard and a budget. She responded with crisp, brutal efficiency, outlining in bullet point format the dozens of ways I had complied with county and state regulations, listing every permit, every survey, and every time-stamped photograph showing that the new fence did not encroach a single inch onto HOA-owned property. It was a fortress of facts, and the HOA's arguments crumbled against it like waves on a seawall. Their next move was to organize a petition trying to rally public support. But that backfired beautifully. The internet loved my story. Memes exploded overnight. "You get what you gate for" was a fan favorite. Someone even photoshopped my cowboy hat onto the Statue of Liberty, branding me the defender of American land rights. By the end of the week, I had t-shirts, mugs, and bumper stickers selling online that read, "The key belongs to me." I donated all the proceeds to a local animal shelter, which made the story even more beloved. Still, the HOA refused to give up. Desperation does strange things to people. One night, a group of residents tried to scale the fence with a ladder, only to be caught on camera by my surveillance system. When sheriff's deputies arrived, I declined to press charges, but I made sure to post the footage online with a caption, "Next time, bring a grappling hook." The HOA tried bribery next, sending one of their board members, Patricia something, with a check for $50,000 if I just take the fence down. She came up my drive in a hybrid SUV, wearing pearls and a plastic smile, holding out the check like she was doing me a favor. I didn't even look at the amount. I handed it back and said, "This isn't about money, ma'am. This is about respect." And respect they had not given me. Not when they started the feud by fencing me off from my own barn. When they mocked my complaints in meetings or suggested that maybe I should just sell the land and move on. No, I wasn't going anywhere. They were the ones who had to reckon with the consequences now. Eventually, they filed a lawsuit. A weak one, built on shaky claims and emotional appeals, but it was enough to get a hearing. Claire and I walked into the county courthouse like cowboys in a Western showdown. On the other side sat the HOA board, stiff and silent in their matching suits, their lawyer sweating bullets as the judge. An older man with no patience for nonsense. Asked them a single question. Did you or did you not secure a legal easement for the road that cuts through Mr. Lockhart's land? The silence in that courtroom could have cracked concrete. Their lawyer stammered, tried to spin, but the documents didn't lie. They had assumed the old easement deal from a prior handshake agreement decades ago would hold. But handshake deals don't stand in court, especially when they were never written down or registered. The judge dismissed the lawsuit with prejudice, and even warned the HOA against further frivolous litigation. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed me again. I gave one quote. They tried to fence me in. I just returned the favor. After that, I made them an offer. A final olive branch, though it came with thorns. I told them they could lease a permanent easement across my land, enough for public access, mail, deliveries, and all the things they needed to resume normal suburban life. But the cost would be steep. First, I wanted reimbursement for the full expense of building my fence, materials, labor, permits. Next, I added a stress multiplier, triple the cost to account for months of emotional strain, missed work, and lost livestock due to the initial blockade they had created. Third, and most controversial of all, I demanded a public, notarized apology from every single member of the HOA board, acknowledging their fault, their overreach, and their disrespect. And finally, I added a clause that sent them into an uproar. The key to the outer gate would remain with me. I would allow electronic access for emergency services and essential functions, but the physical key, that stayed on my belt, right beside the old ranch keys my father once carried. The backlash was swift. Some residents called the terms un-American, accusing me of turning their neighborhood into a prison. But others, quietly at first, began to support me. They saw through the HOA's facade, realizing they were victims of their own leadership's arrogance. Petitions started to circulate, not against me but to recall the board entirely. By the end of the month, half the board had resigned. A new group stepped in, more humble, more practical, and far more eager to negotiate in good faith. We hashed out a modified deal. Same cost, same apology, but with an additional clause. I'd donate half the easement revenue to a community fund for road repairs and local charities. They accepted. Begrudgingly, the remaining board members signed the apology, and a photo of them holding the document went viral. I kept a framed copy in my living room. Every time I walked past it, I smiled. The key still hangs on my belt. They know better than to ask for it now. They've repainted some houses, planted new trees, even built a small park near the edge of the fence line. I let them be. We don't bother each other anymore. But every so often, I see kids from the neighborhood riding their bikes along the inside edge of the fence, staring at the tall wooden posts like they're peering out from a castle. And I wonder if someday one of them will grow up, move out, and build their own ranch. Not behind a gate, but beside it. On their terms. The way it should have been all along. They caved. Not all at once, of course. Not with grace or dignity. But slowly, bitterly, like a river carving a canyon, relentless and inevitable under the steady pressure of time and consequences. Began with hushed conversations behind closed doors. Then escalated to heated debates at emergency HOA meetings where panic began to overshadow pride, and eventually boiled over into finger-pointing and desperate attempts to rewrite their narrative as victims instead of villains. But no amount of spin or denial could change the facts. I had outmaneuvered them legally and strategically, and now their once pristine, tight-knit community was surrounded by a very real, very tall fence with only one access gate, and that gate had one key, and that key belonged to me. For weeks, they endured the inconvenience, forced to enter their neighborhood through a single controlled point, where a smiling security guard I hired tipped his hat and waved them through, knowing full well the entire system operated under my jurisdiction. Delivery services fumed, landscapers grumbled, and residents seethed. But there was nothing they could do without admitting that they had no authority over the access point. The HOA's lawyers, those smug suits who had once tried to outflank me with bureaucratic sleight of hand, now trembled with cautious deference, careful to speak politely in emails and public statements, knowing that anything they said could further antagonize the man who had legally boxed them in. It was poetic justice, the kind that didn't come with applause but with silence, the heavy silence of people realizing they had grossly underestimated the man with calloused hands, boots caked in dust, and an engineer's mind for terrain and structure. When the request finally came, formally typed, notarized, sealed with an embossed HOA stamp, I didn't open it right away. I let it sit on my kitchen counter for a few days, a symbol of their capitulation, a silent monument to my patience. When I did open it, I savored every word. They apologized not profusely but officially. They acknowledged the overreach, the aggressive fencing they'd installed that had blocked off my own ranch access, the easement violations, and the miscommunications that had sparked the original conflict. They proposed a truce, couched in formalities, carefully avoiding the word surrender but making it abundantly clear that's what it was. What they wanted, no, begged for, was a renegotiation. A shared access agreement maintained at my discretion. And they offered something I never even asked for, public contrition. The second envelope they enclosed held a printed apology on gold-foiled paper, complete with signatures from every HOA board member. Even that pompous windbag Gerald who'd once told me I wouldn't last a week in a structured community. That framed apology now hangs above the fireplace in my den. Not because I need the reminder, but because it makes guests laugh. And laughter is a fine reward after a long war fought without raising your voice. I agreed to their terms, of course, on one condition. The fence stays. Not their fence. Mine. The one I built with my own materials, my own labor, surrounding their neighborhood like a crown of humility. The gate, likewise, would remain under my management, with access granted through a keycard system I controlled. I even installed a biometric backup scanner, partly for security, partly because I enjoy watching them nervously press their thumbs to the pad, waiting for my system to approve them. Every now and then, I hear a story about someone being temporarily denied access because they updated their fingerprint too slowly. Accidents happen, systems glitch, and petty power, when wielded with just enough restraint, becomes a lesson that burns longer than any rant ever could. Life changed after that, subtly at first, then profoundly. The once hostile stares from my neighbors shifted to cautious nods, then respectful waves. Where I had been seen as the outsider, the rancher, the stubborn relic of a rural era clinging to his land amid suburban sprawl, I was now the boundary, the immovable object around which their planned perfection was forced to bend. Even the new HOA president, younger woman named Laura who clearly wanted nothing to do with the vendetta her predecessors launched, made an effort to extend olive branches. She showed up at my gate one morning with a peace offering, homemade cornbread and a bottle of bourbon, accompanied by a formal invitation to the HOA's summer barbecue. I accepted the gifts, declined the invitation, and sent back something far more pointed. A box of decorative miniature fences, handcrafted from cedar and painted in pastels to match their home exteriors. Attached was a card that read, "Thought you'd enjoy a taste of your own enclosure." Petty? Absolutely. But also precise. And judging by the chuckles I heard from my ranch hands and the awkward silence from the HOA rep who delivered it, the message landed exactly as intended. The neighborhood has been quieter ever since. No more complaints about my livestock. No more passive-aggressive notices about noise ordinances or the height of my barn. Even Gerald, who once reported me for excessive rooster crowing, now tips his hat when he drives by. The fence taught them something that all their rules and bylaws failed to understand. Power is not about control, it's about consequence. And when you try to box someone in, you'd better be damn sure they don't know how to build a better box around you. The media caught wind of the story a few months after the settlement. Local reporters loved the headline, "Rancher Fences in HOA After Land Dispute." And once it hit regional news, the story spread like prairie fire in July. I did a few interviews, keeping my answers polite and pragmatic, focusing on property rights and legal boundaries, but always with that same smirk that said, "You messed with the wrong man." I became something of a folk hero in certain circles, forums for landowners, rural property rights activists, even a subreddit dedicated to petty revenge with style. They made memes. They photoshopped my face onto old Clint Eastwood posters. My ranch became a minor tourist destination for a while, with people driving out just to see the infamous fence line. I had to put up signs to keep them from wandering too close, but I didn't mind the attention. It was a strange kind of vindication, not just for me, but for every person who had ever been buried in bureaucracy, steamrolled by arrogance, or told to sit down and shut up by someone who thought paperwork was more powerful than principle. The truth is, the fence wasn't about spite, it was about boundaries. Mine had been trampled, ignored, dismissed. So I made new ones, stronger ones, ones they couldn't bypass or erase. And now, with those boundaries in place, there was peace. Not the hollow peace of silence forced by authority, but the sturdy peace of mutual respect earned through fire and grit. These days, my ranch runs smoother than ever. The cattle graze undisturbed, the horses roam with freedom, and the air carries only the sounds of wind and life, not the constant buzz of entitled suburbia pressing at my edges. I've expanded operations, too. Bought up a couple adjacent plots that weren't under HOA jurisdiction, just to give myself more breathing room. And I've started teaching small workshops on fencing, land surveying, and rural law. Young folks come out on weekends to learn how to stand their ground, how to read topographic maps, how to build more than just fences, how to build resolve. I tell them my story sometimes, not to brag, but to remind them that standing firm doesn't require rage or revenge, just a deep knowledge of where you stand and what you stand for. I've even written a book, self-published, modest print run called Barbed Wisdom, How Fences Make Good Neighbors. Part memoir, part manual, and it's already got a surprising number of 5-star reviews from people who've never even owned a yard. Maybe it's the principle that resonates. Maybe it's just satisfying to know that sometimes the good guy can win without becoming the villain. Maybe it's just satisfying to know that sometimes the good guy can win without becoming the villain.